the history of allotments, really. A lot of people realise that they were huge during the war, and quite a lot of people think that that's when they came about. But of course, we've had allotments in England for over 200 years. They started during the 18th and 19th century, when there was the Enclosure Acts happened, which was when the common land was enclosed by landowners, and people who used to use that land for communal farming, communal foraging and growing, they were excluded from that land and it was enclosed. But the landowners agreed with the governments and the councils that people should still be allowed to have a little bit of land for themselves to carry on growing. So that's where allotments actually came from. So in a way, they're kind of the last sort of remnants of that previous common land we held. That link was understood by the Victorians, for example, who introduced the 1908 Small Holdings Allotment Act, which required councils to provide a sufficient number of allotments for people across the country. And now there's some debate whether they actually still are providing a sufficient number of allotments, and the witness to that is the vast waiting lists up and down the country. And I'd argue that the government and the councils aren't providing a sufficient number of allotments for people who want them. But it is every person's actual right to have an allotment.
If more people in the city were asked, if you had a very affordable little piece of land given to you, would you like to show your kids or be shown yourself how to grow some easy vegetables, how to dig over a bit of earth, maybe share it? Don't have to think of it as a really massive project and work in your life, but somewhere to connect with what we eat, where it comes from, experience what we like and dislike, and maybe see to discover new things.
What the allotment gives me is so deep and so rich that my only wish is that more people got to experience it, and with long waiting lists, and I think people would just so appreciate if we could just have more of them. I think there's so many pluses.
I think it's underestimated how crucial that link to the land is for people. We've all grown used to living quite disconnected lives in cities, and very disconnected not only from the land but especially from our food. And I think that might be an issue that really needs to be addressed. I think people should be encouraged to grow their own food and to make that connection back with the land. And we have a mechanism in the allotments by which that could happen. I'm really keen to push for more allotments across the country. I think it's something that a lot more people would take up. And I think the benefits, as I've spoken about before, would pay for themselves. The benefits that it gives not just to people's food security, their physical health and their mental health, which would obviously take some weight off the pressure of the health service. But also by encouraging, as I've said before, that sense of community amongst people. I see allotments as it's amazing that we still have them. It's amazing that the law requires councils to provide them. I just wish there were more.
It's a funny thing. You get an allotment thinking about growing veg, and actually the best things about having a plot aren't actually about growing the veg. It's actually about coming down here, it being quiet, a little bit isolated, pottering around, doing stuff that feels sort of useful and meaningful without in any way being pressured. And the fact that you feel like part of a bit of a community. I was saying before, I've moved around a lot with work in my working life, and I'm not somebody who's easily and instant with making friends, but actually down here, because of the thing of having something to talk about with people, You're not kind of initiating a conversation out of the blue. You're commenting on their veg or they're commenting on yours. And it starts off conversations. And I think I know more people better down here than I do in the street I live in.
But I think people come up here in order to do their thing and probably get away from it all. So there's a level of sociability as well. I've definitely made friends here, people I talk to. I've got friends who I share the plot with. So that can be very social too. We sit around, have a cup of tea, a bun, or a glass of wine or something like that. So yeah, it's been great. But I wouldn't say I know everybody up and down. I know quite a lot of people to say hello to. It's like an oasis in the city, really. I mean, you can hear the traffic. Sometimes you can't, which is great. But it does feel like you're away from it. It's fantastic.
When I first discovered the valley, I was just stunned with it. The way that it really cuts you off from the city. You walk from the street a few meters and you're on this plot, and because it's a valley, it just cuts out the noise from the streets, and it's like a haven.
One of our neighbours is actually a doctor, and he's made it clear to us that, especially during this COVID times, that he's been under so much stress is unbelievable, and he's thoroughly enjoyed coming down and using his plot to just relieve himself of some of that stress.
I do have a history of depression, and I can really say that being here is just so uplifting. A friend of mine's father, who also suffered from depression, said when you're low, go and plant potatoes. And I completely get what he meant about that. It's about having your hands in the soil and nourishing and watching something and protecting it.
I think this place slows me down, allows me to stop and think about things rather than just rushing into them. I think it's been extremely good for my mental health and for that of other plot holders up here. I think if you're feeling angry, you can dig it out. If you're feeling depressed, you can just sit and look at a flower. It's wonderful.
During the lockdown, and I think many people would have experienced this in the early part of 2020, it was a brilliant place to come. The thing about allotments is you can do a lot of stuff, so you can work, you can create. So all of these things are positive for your mental health. People were bringing their children too, because they didn't know what to do with them, because they weren't in school. But the very nature of allotments is they're quite social. You can be on your allotment, you can be at least 2 meters away from anybody else, because they're perfectly placed for that sort of correspondence with people, that communication.
I've seen a lot of changes in the site since I've been here. Like I say, it was mostly old men back then. Retired old men used to come up every day, and now it's families, and we got 67% women here now. There's a lot more ethnic. We never had any ethnic minorities here at all. I think I was the first openly gay person ever to come here, and now we've got loads of gay people. So yeah, it's definitely changed.
The average plot holder in Brighton is now actually a woman in her 40s, and that shows how allotments are evolving. People now, especially women, want to bring their kids up. They want to show their kids how the food is being grown. They're interested in other aspects of allotments, not just the growing of food, but the nature aspect, the encouraging the biodiversity.
And I think that's made a difference to the feel of the valley. I think it's freer than it used to be. Mm-hmm. I think the old boys used to dig in very straight rows and keep everything very regimented. And there's a different feeling now around the valley. You won't see many plots that are just row after row after row of cabbages or rhubarb. People are growing more interesting things, more variety of things. I think there's a better community here than there used to be.
I would just say sign up. Get on the allotment list and make sure the council knows that it's a really loved resource, and when allotments are under threat, go out and fight for them, petition for them, because they're amazing. For £50 a year or whatever it is, you get so much.
It's really important for cities to have these open spaces protected and maintained, and I would say expanded. There ought to be more sites identified for gardening and for wildlife, and I think the two are, you can do the two together.
we need these kinds of places. I think perhaps something that might hopefully come out of COVID is that local councils, central government, people with a level of authority recognise that these kinds of places, and particularly the valley here, have a value that actually, if you want to put it in hard cash terms, you could, because I do think it genuinely has benefits for the people who have plots, for the local community round about, and for the mental well-being of everyone who's involved. But also, there are intangible goods out of having a chunk of a town or a city that is given over to something other than commerce and housing. And I think that isn't always easily recognised in a world where commercial value is everything.